Hello, I'm Alison and I write the Blackberry Garden blog at blackberrygarden.co.uk, and today I want to talk to you about two books about elements of garden design, a new book and an old book. The first book is from the RHS. It's Jack Wallington's The Gardener's Book of Patterns. This is the second book from Jack. I can heartily recommend his first book as well, Wild About Weeds, which I've also reviewed on the blog, blackberrygarden.co.uk. This follow-up book is all about why pattern matters so much in gardens, about how as humans we have patterns all around us all the time. So he talks about, we use patterns in our homes, the wallpaper that we have. He talks about, we wear patterns, we like it on our clothes. And this translates also into how we surround ourselves in our gardens. So he talks about texture, about form and colour. He talks about patterns in how we lay our gardens out, the landscaping, the hardscaping, even down to how we arrange tables and chairs. This is a really in-depth book. He uses examples from history as well, just to show us that this is nothing new. It's always been happening. I'm going to show you some of the bits that really struck me. So there's a section on unity, about how we tie the different patterns together to get a unified idea in our gardens. Talked about hardscaping. So there's tiling, how we use tiling, brick patterns, how all these things matter, the paving that we choose. It is my heart's desire to have a rill one day. Rills are just wonderful things, but I do not live in a house big enough to have a rill in the garden. So I can heartily recommend that book. I bought it. I'm under no obligation to talk about it whatsoever, but I just think it's well worth having a look at. So the second book I wanted to talk to you about is The Curious Gardener's 6 Elements of Garden Design. Now this is an old book, first published in 1999. Some of you may remember that there was actually a television series about this. So the Curious Gardeners, Guy Cooper, Gordon Taylor, used to drive around in an old classic car, an Alvis, very, very beautiful car, and visit different gardens to give examples of what they were talking about. So there are 6 chapters to this book: time, form, materials, water, sculpture and plants. And they use different gardens in depth to explain what they're talking about. So they use some gardens that you may well have visited. So the ones here that I've been to are Hestercombe and Hidcote and Beth Chatto's. But then there's gardens in here that I don't know. Probably the chapter I liked the best, though I like all of the book, is actually the one on time, because I'd never really thought about time as an element of design. But it's really important, and if you think about it, of course it is. There's one bit I want to read to you from the book because I really liked it. So this is talking about Sissinghurst Castle. People who like to boast of their long and deep acquaintance with the place are apt to say that Sissinghurst is no longer what it was in Vita's day, implying that it has lost something of its serenity and betrayed her genius. Let the reply be this: that no garden is or should ever be what it was, since it is a living, growing, changing thing, and it would be foolish, unimaginative and actually treacherous to Vita's own conception of a garden to replace every plant that dies and every tree that topples over by the same plant or the same tree. And that was Nigel Nicholson on Sissinghurst Castle. And I do think that's really important, because when something does die in the garden, it is an opportunity to replace it with something else. Our gardens evolve all the time. It's often said that gardens are not set in aspic, and they're not, and they shouldn't be. But also there's the time in the garden about how things mature. So I've been living in this garden now for about 12 years, and most of the trees in the garden that I've planted, I had to plant them as twigs. I couldn't afford to buy really big trees. It just isn't how my life works. But now they're getting to be really quite tall and developing into the trees that I hoped they would be. So time is a really important part in our gardens. And if we're lucky enough not to have to move all the time, it gives real pleasure to see plants become what they can be. I wanted to talk about this book because I think it complements Jack's book very much. They are different. They're both talking about elements of garden design, but they're doing it in different ways. I think they sit really happily together on my bookshelf, and I just thought it was really interesting to talk about them both together, and that you might actually want to have a look at both of them. You can still get the Curious Gardener's book on various online booksellers. Well worth a look if you can. Thank you ever so much for listening.